Hello everybody, this is ManuS and I'm coming to you this time with another Legends of Runeterra deck tech. My first in the new metagame after the balance patch, and my friend Patrick Dickman and I came up with a pretty cool Heimerdinger Midrange deck to attack the current metagame that seems to mostly be control and burn aggro style decks. And yeah, we came up with a pretty cool list that has been doing really well yesterday in our initial testing against both of them, and I wanted to share it with you because the list is actually pretty refined and has felt really good. So it's a great option to try and attack the current metagame. And it's also a pretty cool deck that makes nice use of the Lux buff. So couple of cool aspects here. And before we dive in, you know the drill. Hit the subscribe button down below. Turn on the notification icon to not miss out on future content. And now let's take a look. Alright, so this is the deck. It plays a lot of the typical cards you would expect in a deck like this, but some not so typical. One of the more interesting things about both Heimerdinger and Lux are that they kind of lend themselves to various playstyles. Like you can build both of them as control, you can build them as more of a mid-range strategy, and you can even build them as more of an aggro control strategy. And this approach leans heavily towards the mid-range side of this approach, which makes a lot of sense in how the metagame is right now, since with Heimerdinger and Lux you have enough top-end power to kind of make sure you can close out games against control still, which is often potentially a weakness of mid-range strategies. And the mid-range part is what makes it much better against the burn decks than an aggro control or control approach would be, because they're too reactive and too fragile and don't have enough board presence to stifle the early aggression. So let's talk about the card choices. For removal we have 3 beam, 3 shot, 3 get excited, and that's basically it for removal. Just your typical removal package you see in any like Heimerdinger P and Z deck. Beam is just flexible in what it can kill, although it's a bit inflexible in your mana use, but that's the cost of playing the card. Then Mystic Shot is just cheap, efficient, and flexible. It can't kill everything, but there are a lot of good targets, and the fact that it's fast, and also that it can deal damage to the face, which can sometimes matter given that we have a proactive plan. And the final sparks from Lux also deal some face damage here and there. Is a nice addition, especially combined with Get Excited. And yeah, Get Excited kills a wider variety of things, especially against other Heimerdinger decks, sometimes against Ezreal if they run it out too early and stuff like that. So yeah, just a decent card. It comes at a huge cost, having to discard a card, but the deck generates extra cards from Pickpocket, Heimerdinger, and so on, that and even Vanguard Sergeant, that you usually can get away with it decently without hurting yourself too much. Then we have a unit package, which is actually pretty important and fairly big for a deck like this. It's 3 Campunk Pickpocket, 3 Scrapdash Assembly, 3 Succession, 3 Vanguard Redeemer, 3 Vanguard Sergeant, and 3 Remembrance. So let's talk about those cards. This card is just really, really good. First of all, it blocks even against Fearsome, it trades with all the early drops, and if there's no early drop, it's super scary. Basically, if this connects once, it's already super devastating for the opponent. We get a free spell, which is great with Lux and Heimerdinger. It's a free card to discard to Get Excited if it's not a good card that we draw. And it's just card advantage, and it's something that really forces the opponent to react to us, especially against other more reactive decks, which is huge. The big addition that we came up with was Scrapdash Assembly, since we tried to figure out how to make sure we don't lose to these hyper-aggressive new burn decks, these P&Z Noxus burn decks that have been popping up yesterday. And Scrapdash Assembly is pretty great against them. Like, they play Saboteur and they play Grenadier. Both are 1 health units, and the Scrapdash Assembly blanks 2 of these for 1 card. And even if they only have 1, you can like throw one scuttler in front of one of them, and the other one can just jump something, which is still really good. And the important part here is that it's two bodies for one card and one action, and pretty cheap. Unlike, for example, the other card that we considered was Eager Apprentice, which is a 2/1 for 0 mana and one card. But the problem is, first of all, it takes 2 actions to follow it up with, say, a succession. So sometimes they might attack you with 2 dudes, and you can only block one and take damage from the other, which is already problematic, especially given that the deck doesn't have any options for life gain. So you really want to avoid any damage where you can. And the fact that it's a spell sometimes comes in handy with Heimerdinger or Lux, but not that often because our spells usually cost 3 or 6. So with a 3 cost, it will go to 5 with Lux, so it doesn't quite trigger Lux. And with Heimerdinger, you get a 2/1 turret, which is often not that great, especially because board space. So a lot of the time that's not that great, but if you're scrounging for bodies, it can still be useful and does more than the Apprentice. Plus the thing with Apprentice is that it's only one body, and then they can counter it for 1 mana with Blade's Edge, tempoing you, and resources really don't matter that much in this matchup. It's what matters is your life total and doing as much with your mana and your actions as possible. So generating multiple blockers with one action is very vital, especially in the early game, where they often don't want to open attack and want to play their second attacker, especially if they are on even, for example. They play the 1-drop and then they're going to play another unit on 2, and then you get 1 action before they get to attack, and then you assembly and blank their 1, their 2. Which is perfect. Also, the tokens are great throwaway units to activate Vanguard Redeemer. The deck also basically has 6 2-drops and 6 3-drops, and then 1 card that can be both, because the deck doesn't really do anything on 1, except for sometimes beaming on their 1-drop if it's a 2/1. So that means on turn 2, you can often play Succession if you want to, which is great. It's a pretty great 2-drop. It blanks some of the 1 and 2 drops that the aggressive decks have. It blanks Elise. It's just a really flexible card. It's also a 3-cost spell for Lux and Heimerdinger. So you can go like Flash of Brilliance into Succession to either get 2 Heimerdinger triggers or level and activate Lux ones, which is amazing, and create a blocker or attacker in the same action, which is pretty sweet. And of course, if you have a 2-drop like Assembly or Pickpocket, it makes for a decent turn 3 play if you don't have any of these. Also, once again, on turn 2, it helps potentially activate a Redeemer on 3, either by attacking on 3 and forcing them to block, or if you don't have the attack token, potentially trading with one of their attackers and then playing a Redeemer. That leads me to the 3-drops. Vanguard Sergeant is secretly amazing here. First of all, we have a fair share of units, so the For Demacia actually does something, which is another reason why Scuttler is a bit nicer than Apprentice here, because 2 bodies is a lot better for Demacia than 1, and that matters in matchups where we are the aggressor, like against stuff like the Freljord Shadow Isles control that Alansku used to take rank 1 yesterday, I think. And a lot of people have been picking up, and that matchup has been great. I played against like 3 in a row yesterday and farmed them easily. And yeah, Scrap Dash Assembly mattering for Demacia there is pretty sweet. And also Sergeant creates a free card for Get Excited once again. It creates a 6-cost spell to get a Final Spark or even level Lux. Even if it doesn't do that much in terms of combat in that spot, it might still be worth just leveling your Lux and getting a Final Spark for 6 mana. And of course, it's just really nice with Heimerdinger. Heimerdinger creates a full board pretty quickly. Also, For Demacia is 6, so it generates a 6/1 Overwhelm from Heimerdinger, so you can buff your whole board, then drop the 6/1 Overwhelm, attack with everything, and suddenly your opponent is dead. So the card actually does a whole lot. And 3/3 lines up pretty well. It's a pretty decent threat. It blocks well against a lot of things. It blocks some stuff without dying. It can block Fearsome, which is still relevant. And last but not least, of the early unit package, we have Vanguard Redeemer, which is just amazing. It's great value. It's another 2-for-1. The deck has a lot of 2-for-1 potential in various matchups, and yeah, it also has a chance to draw a Lux or a Heimerdinger, so it virtually increases your chance of finding those by a little bit. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. So yeah, it's just a great card, and with the other units and early units and chump blockers and chump attackers from Scuttler that we have, Redeemer is actually pretty easy to activate. And sometimes you just play like a turn 2 assembly and attack turn 3 into even like a chump attack in their board, and they often will block because they don't want to take the damage or they don't know what's up, and then you get a free Redeemer even easier. Otherwise you can just play it later off curve. There's just a lot of options. And the last unit that we have is Remembrance. If the game is kind of slow or you don't have another early play and you're not under pressure, you can just float turn 1 and turn 2, and then turn 3 just make a 5-drop, which is pretty sweet. And of course, with all the stuff dying to enable it, this gets cheaper. Like a lot of the time, like with turn 2 Scrap Dash Assembly, you have 1 mana floating, then the opponent has the attack token on 3, attacks you, you jump with both, make a Remembrance with your 4 mana, and have a 33% chance to roll an active Radiant Guardian against an aggressive deck, and then the game just ends. It's super powerful, and even a 5/5 tough, if you roll the Cavalry, is really good. And against aggressive decks, the Lancer is the weakest. In other matchups, it might be the best, or one of the best, but no matter what you roll, all 3 of them are pretty good and fairly close in power level in most matchups. There's usually just a hierarchy among the 3 in matchups, but none of them are really bad. And of course, it's another potential 6-cost spell to trigger Lux. It's a good big spell for Heimerdinger, and so on and so forth. It's just a really great card, very flexible, and even if you have nothing going on and just jam it on turn 3, making a 5/5 on turn 3 is pretty good against a lot of decks. Like against Fearsome, sometimes you just take an attack on turn 2, and then on turn 3 you just slam your Remembrance, hit them for 5, and suddenly they are looking pretty bad. Card has been really great. Then we have 3 Heimerdinger and 3 Lux. The 3rd Lux is not 100% set in stone. Could be that this should be something else, like 1 Progress Day, or a 3rd Prismatic Barrier. I'll talk about that in a bit. Or a random one-off, like cards like Chain Vest or Radiant Strike as a one-off can be interesting simply because they're really, really good with Chempunk and just pretty decent with everything else, but especially good at protecting Heimerdinger later for cheap, since there's a lot of stuff that deals 3 damage to him, and then these can just protect him for 1 and make him much more durable. But for now, we decided to stick with 6 Lux, because since her buff, she actually is a pretty good unit, and yeah, drawing, you just want to draw her often. The deck is pretty good at making final sparks, and she's just a bit more active than a Progress Day, and so far we didn't really feel like we need a Progress Day. And also having 3 Lux increases the chance of getting a Lux or Heimerdinger from a Redeemer trigger. And then we have the remaining spells. Not much to say here. 3 Flash of Brilliance, auto-include in any Heimerdinger or Lux deck, lets you activate both of them very efficiently if you have the 3 spell mana the turn you drop them. Then we have the 2 Prismatic Barrier, just a nice way to protect Lux and Heimerdinger, or even like a good Remembrance unit or a Chempunk against the control deck, stuff like that. The card is a bit situational, which is why we opted for 2 for now, but I can see going up to 3. The other thing why there's 2 is Lux turns into Barrier and we run 3 Lux, so once we have the first one out, the other ones are barriers, so as soon as you have a Lux in play, she's also not that easy to kill, you suddenly have 4 barriers. Although, of course, that doesn't really help a turn 5 Heimerdinger, so there's still some consideration for the 3rd. And then we have 2 back-to-back, which actually secretly is kind of a buff for this deck, that it costs 6 now, because it gives you a single card burst spell that gives you a final spark. Like imagine a spot where either you are first to act on attack and you want to only give the opponent one action before you get to attack, then you can just back-to-back get a spark, play the spark, they get an action, and then you get to attack. But more importantly, a lot of the time, they will want to do something before they attack and don't want to open attack, and give you one action before they attack you, and then normally you, in most cases, couldn't make a final spark, except maybe you have like one or multiple Flash of Brilliances followed by like a Prismatic Barrier. And with back-to-back, you can just buff two guys, get a final spark one of their attackers, have big blockers from back-to-back, and suddenly the opponent doesn't have a good attack anymore. This came up a fair share in our testing already, and back-to-back, given the deck's fairly proactive and kind of mid-range beatdown nature, also is just really good on offense, either when you're open attacking, or just to close out games, counter damage-based removal and sweeper stuff like Veil, Avalanche. Both cards are 3-offs in the Freljord Shadow Isles control deck, for example, or even like burn-based removal out of Heimerdinger and Azrael decks, or just countering their freeze attempts, especially when they try to freeze and block to kill your stuff for free. Just a lot of things. And yeah, the fact that it now costs 6 instead of 5 actually is kind of great for this deck. So kind of a backdoor buff here for this specific deck, ironically. So yeah, that's the list. Deck is really sweet, has been playing really well and feels pretty powerful and well positioned. So give it a try, and we of course gonna take it to battle in ranked some more. I've already climbed from like mid to low, I think like mid 200s to almost top 100 with it, and we hopefully can break deeper into top 100 in the video now. Gonna play 4 games, so make sure to check those out after this deck tech. And if you wanna support the content and enjoy the content, please leave a like. Let me know in the comments what you think. Share it with your friends, and of course consider whitelisting YouTube on your adblock, or turn off your adblock for YouTube. That helps all your favorite content creators that you're watching on here, and is totally free. Alright, that's it again for the deck, and I'll see you in a moment with game number 1. Stay tuned.